Hi there. This is part of my ongoing coverage of the big news spread in Entertainment Weekly about House of the Dragon. It's the first big set of public interviews with the cast and showrunner. Like I said in my first video, if I made only one big report, it would be an hour long and a lot would get lost in the shuffle, so I'm breaking it up into smaller pieces more focused on each individual point. This specific video is on information we got from the cast about what the audition process was like. Now, previously we hadn't heard much about this. It was one of the few things they could briefly talk about. We knew there was a audition process, because Olivia Cooke said I had to audition for stuff, but I can't say more than that. Sometimes there is no audition. Peter Dinklage was handpicked to play Tyrion Lannister. Sean Bain was handpicked to play Ned Stark. That's fine. Sometimes you know people very well, but I'll say that based on our limited info so far, I have not heard of anyone who was handpicked yet. Everyone had to audition. And consider that this show was greenlit October 2019, and the core trio was announced December 2020. By that point, they were announcing Alicent, Rhaenyra, and Daemon, and they had been cast a couple of weeks before that. So at some point before December 2020 is when it ended. They were auditioning for this they said each one of them, whenever they started, it was about a 3-month process. They were auditioning for this spring to summer of 2020, at the height of the original COVID lockdown. So all of them in their stories about this are describing how we were just, Emma Darcy says, my first round audition was self-recorded on my iPhone propped up against a bag of chips. And you expect that, the first round auditions are, audition tapes. You send them in. We've heard of that. Like when Arya was cast, they said we sent in all these tapes first. But there's multiple rounds of auditions. It lasts about 3 months. That normally they'd be doing the later rounds in a studio with like makeup and stuff. That you go in to record it, or at least can get your own makeup. They said it was still height of lockdown. We couldn't even get our hair done on a private personal level around the house, much less go out and get movie quality, hair and makeup at the local studio or something. And saying how a lot of us never met in person up until we were filming, that we'd only seen the showrunners even across Zoom when normally the final round audition would be live. This was not. This was done over Zoom and everything. Just the hassles of doing that. There's an anecdote about the Rhaenyra one from Emma Darcy I'll explain at the end. But the interesting thing they all shared about the audition process is the placeholder dialogue they used. And I know of this, you haven't seen before. They don't have you read off the finished written script. Sometimes it doesn't exist yet, or because so many people are auditioning, they don't want to give out spoilers like that. So for Game of Thrones, they had people reading off book dialogue, like the infamous one with Sophie Turner and Maisie Williams. It's edited together from both of them, where it's the dialogue from the Ruby Ford scene that never made it into the actual show, but they used, it's called slug dialogue for, like a slug script, just placeholder dialogue for the audition tape. And you don't pick what you audition with. They give you audition dialogue to use, and it's placeholder, and everyone knows that going in. So this also came up with the Cargyle twins. We know they made up dialogue, and everyone said, don't judge the quality of this. This is just placeholder stuff. They're looking for the delivery more than the informational content. Well, the problem is that Fire and Blood doesn't have that much dialogue in it because it's an outline. And there's some zingers here and there, there's some lines, but they're out of context for the overall tone of the character. I mean, angry one-liners that Aemond might have wouldn't be how the whole character is played. And even then, there's some characters just don't have much dialogue as such. I can see that happening. So for these auditions for House of the Dragon, they picked samples of dialogue from different characters in Game of Thrones to audition with as a placeholder. I think it's interesting to study that, if this might give some sense of where they're leaning with the interpretation of certain characters. Obviously, there are differences. That it's like Kristen Cole isn't Jaime Lannister, but it's like Jaime with a twist. That he's Jaime-like, but he's not Jaime. So read into this as you will of which placeholder dialogue they tell people to use. We know of what 3 actors used. Starters, Olivia Cooke as adult Alicent. She said that the placeholder dialogue she used, that she was given, was from Cersei Lannister. But, and she talks about this in the video part of the interview a lot, she was grateful that, as she said repeatedly, I never saw Game of Thrones before I got this show. I mean, I was aware of it. I wasn't living under a rock. I was busy with other projects. I didn't have time to be into a show. And she said that, that's great because if I had seen it, try as I might, I would have been subconsciously influenced by Lena Headey's iconic performance. That I would have been imitating her even when I was trying not to. So while she had Cersei dialogue, she didn't even recognize that it was from Game of Thrones, much less that it was from Cersei. And this allowed her to develop her own take on the character, because even I say Alicent isn't Cersei-like. I think she's like Olenna Tyrell, that she is a rational person who is ruthless to her enemies, but she's not stupid. That Cersei, particularly book Cersei, is stupid evil, the way Joffrey is stupid evil, that you're so petty and evil that it's counterproductive, versus Alicent isn't ruthless to the point of absurdity, that there's point in the book, she's one of the ones arguing for, we'll try the diplomatic solution first, because it's more efficient, because we might not win, because if we send assassins against them, they might try to send assassins against us. That she is generally a rational actor, much like Olenna Tyrell, this makes her a lot more dangerous. So it's weird that they gave her Cersei dialogue. I guess for the Olenna is never speaking with authority. That I'm doing the I'm a dainty old woman act and then being ruthless in private. Like if you used like season 1 dialogue of Cersei issuing commands in the formal royal court, I can see how that's the tone you're looking for, that we never saw the Tyrell women talking like that, as I am commanding you as your queen to do something. Not in a crazy way, but just when they're talking formally at, like, when they arrive at Winterfell or something, that the way Cersei would talk in public as a queen, that's the register you use. I can see why you give her Cersei stuff as just a placeholder. What's interesting is that the second one we have here, Millie Alcock said what placeholder stuff they told her to use for young Rhaenyra. Arya. Young Rhaenyra, they chose to use Arya Stark dialogue as a placeholder more than any other character. For people thinking, oh, well, she's Cersei, obviously. Like, I don't think Alicent is Cersei. I don't think Rhaenyra is Cersei. But here's a question. We know who adult Alicent was basing their dialogue on. And we know what young Rhaenyra was the sampling of placeholder dialogue they were doing. We don't know what young Alicent and adult Rhaenyra were doing. Emma Darcy talks about their audition, but not what dialogue was used. Maybe they change over time, because from other parts of the interview you got the impression that they're going for a sort of Sansa-Arya dynamic between Alicent and Rhaenyra in their youth. Which kind of makes sense. They go, well, Alicent is the dutiful daughter who's anxiously following the rules because her father is this powerful politician. Rhaenyra is the one who's, I'm the new heir, I can do what I want, and her father's indulging her. Okay, that made sense the way they described it. That, yeah, that's kind of Arya-like. Alicent, I think, to contrast with that, they give her, but we must follow the rules. A rambunctious Arya-type person, they probably use Sansa dialogue. Maybe. But big if, they start with Sansa stuff and switch to Cersei stuff by the time Alicent is an adult, like, would adult Rhaenyra also be using Arya stuff? I think she's more melancholy when she's an adult Rhaenyra. So, what person would they base adult Rhaenyra on? Catelyn? I don't know. That is a big question that I'm looking forward to, of what was your placeholder dialogue from it? I don't think it could have been Arya. I do hold out some hope that the young Alicent actress, Emily Carey, she's online a lot, and she will interact with fans on live streams on Instagram. She'll say, I can't talk about a lot, but she'll try to answer things nicely. So next time she does one of those, if I catch it, I will ask. I've managed to ask her questions like twice before. I mean, generic questions, but if you've seen, I posted those. It was like a 30-second clip. It was nothing, but she's nice. She answers stuff, or tries to. Better yet, you guys promise me I might not be around. If you guys manage to catch her during a live stream, can you please ask her, hey, I think you're allowed to talk about this because everyone else is. Which character were you using as placeholder dialogue in your audition? Because Olivia Cooke already said she was doing Cersei. Millie said she was using Arya. What did you use? And try to record it if possible, just so we can see, well, what stuff were you using in your audition. And so I think we have a reasonable chance of flagging her down to ask her that. Or if you're in any sort of like Reddit Ask Me Anything or Twitter Q&A thing, as opposed to who is your favorite character, a productive question for Emily Carey is, who did they use for your audition dialogue? What was your placeholder? In contrast to everyone else. Said that there are 3 people who said who they used as placeholder dialogue. Third one was Steve Toussaint, who said that the placeholder dialogue they used for Corlys Velaryon was Tywin Lannister. But then he went on for a paragraph discussing how this made sense to him, and yet it made sense to me too, the way he described it. I'm going to talk about this more in the Velaryons video. But if you think about it, they're both the richest living man in Westeros in their generation. They are both powerful, respected, and feared. One of the most powerful men in the royal court, in the realm when they gather there. Commander of armies, he's a military commander, that this is a man who has weight to his decisions. And obviously he's not the king, but he is this powerful nobleman and politician, and how he carries himself, the authority with which he delivers the lines. And I can see the parallels there, that just as Alicent is like, what if Cersei wasn't crazy? She'd be more dangerous and more capable. What if Tywin didn't have a massive chip on his shoulder from having a weakling father, and then got embittered from his beloved wife dying young in childbirth? That instead Corlys had a normal relationship with his parents, and his beloved wife is still alive, and they've been married for many years and seen their children grow up to have children of their own. That he's not like, he wouldn't be crazy and embittered the way the whole Tyrion with Joanna Lannister thing happened. A lot more potent that way. So there's some parallels, but he went on to talk about how, well, in some ways he is, some ways he isn't, that he's a patriarch, but unlike Tywin, well, Tywin in his warped way wanted what was best for the family, but he really hated his children. That I like this contrast. I hate it when there's characters who are just evil. The best conflicts are from people who have, they're both trying to do the right thing. They have just different interpretations of it. That Corlys is this powerful, weighty politician. He's the patriarch of his family in a feudal society, and he wants what's best for his children, which includes making them enter into arranged political marriages, which from his perspective are good for them, and in many ways you could say they are. Like, what's wrong with wanting your daughter to be in an arranged marriage to the king? That, daughter Laena, why wouldn't you want to marry Viserys? But father, I'm 12 years old, and he's older than you. But you're losing sight of the big picture here. This is good for you. You'll be queen of all of Westeros. Like that, the family dynamic of father thinks he knows best, and he's not from an evil point, not the way Tywin didn't want what was best for Cersei and Tyrion. He saw them as tools. That in his perspective, Corlys thinks, well, I know what's best. It's from that old patrician mindset. And all these other things they talk about with back and forth. Well, he's kind of like Tywin in some ways, different in others. I'll talk about that more. But yeah, it was interesting that we used Tywin as a placeholder. And you think about it, because the whole race change thing, which I think is a good idea, they used Tywin Lannister as their comparison for this character, or for the placeholder dialogue. And it's just meant to be in the same ballpark, roughly the same tone. This is a powerful nobleman speaking with authority in the middle of the royal council, in front of open court, in front of hundreds of people. Versus, like, they talk about in the article, we didn't want to just cram in black people as, oh, there's some pirates over there who happen to be black. Now, I actually think Saldor San, there was a good performance in Game of Thrones, but it's still, we didn't just default to, hey, let's give him one of the black guys from Game of Thrones as a character. And think about, we are treating him as like, okay, he talks with the authority level that Tywin Lannister would in front of a royal council. That's very nice. But there were interesting thoughts on how they're doing this back and forth. And I'm more interested in, like, well, what did Rhaenyra, did they change over time with Rhaenyra and Alicent, their dynamic? But we'll see how that goes. Also, I mentioned at the beginning, I'd give the anecdote that Emma Darcy shared about the final audition. The first one, Emma propped up their iPhone against a bag of chips, did it, and this led to a series of audition rounds that lasted 3 months. They said they looked for dozens of actresses in the hunt for Rhaenyra worldwide over Zoom for this. And in the final round, well, semi-final, second to last round, you graduate to the point where you get a direct Zoom call with the showrunners, Condal and Sapochnik, and it went well, but near the end they asked Emma, do you have a wig? That they want to see, okay, well, we're just recording this, can you like try to look like Rhaenyra with like a wig or something? And it's the height of the pandemic. Now, if you've seen recent photos of Emma Darcy, and when they did this interview last month in June, the interviewer in the article says Emma back then looked much as they do now, that Emma is non-binary and has a buzz cut. I mean, not short pixie hair, but a buzz cut. So at the time, Emma also had a buzz cut and just looked at the interviewer and said, do I look like the kind of person who owns a wig? No. So I don't have one in my house, and this is the height of COVID lockdown. I can't just go out to a studio and, with the makeup people and film it with a wig they have on hand. I can't even go to like a costume store and buy a cheap wig. There is nothing open but supermarkets. There are no wigs. And I don't have one, and this is going to be the make or break. Do I look effeminate enough to play Rhaenyra? Was a thing a lot of people were saying, unfortunately. I'm like, guys, actors act, they transform all the time. So what Emma says happened is they did have some extensions left over from another job, hair extensions, but that was before the haircut for the buzz cut. So the extensions were attached to longer hair before, but after the buzz cut, I'm a guy, I don't know this, but you need something to attach the extensions to, and with a buzz cut, you can't do that. So they said, okay, the final round audition is tomorrow. Emma says this resulted in, quote, for 24 hours, me and my partner just tried. I can't put more emphasis behind that word. They tried to attach this. My hair was about as long as it is now. We hot glued these hair extensions to these wig grips. And we would send photos to Miguel, and we thought we'd cracked it, and he would keep sending back, can you keep trying? That it wasn't just this miraculous, hooray, we did it. He kept going, this looks kind of weird, can you send a better one? And we kept trying until we found something that gave me the illusion I had long hair. This is this non-binary actor struggling with, well, you don't look, when we go, oh, they don't look effeminate enough. That was a major problem in the audition process that very nearly cost Emma the job, because Emma couldn't just skip out to a wig store in the middle of the pandemic. And says, and then every time we taped after that, I would sit in front of the television and my partner would do my hair extensions for an hour and a half before we taped anything. And it was a really bad experience. The one thing I'll point out here is I've been writing wiki articles and profiles. I made a profile video about Emma Darcy back last spring. And I said, we know almost nothing about Emma Darcy. Very private person, mostly a theater actor. So everyone knows who Matt Smith is, and Olivia Cooke has been on the indie film circuit for a decade and has done extensive interviews about her personal life. So I am putting together a thing about Olivia Cooke as a profile. We know very little about Emma Darcy. We know Emma was from the West Country, hence the accent of England. Family was in the spiritualist church, but Emma left it. No theater stuff they did, but otherwise very little about Emma's life. We know all of that. Emma has an Instagram, but it's just artsy pics of landscapes that catch Emma's eye and stuff. I thought Emma was single because on the Instagram, I have never seen Emma with other people. That in this interview, Emma says, my partner was doing this. I have no idea who this partner is, race, age, orientation, whatever. Just know Emma Darcy is not single, or at least wasn't at the time. I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know if Emma even feels comfortable talking about that in an upcoming interview. I mean, I'm not a paparazzi living in Britain, so it's not like I could find out. But if they mention that, I'll bring it up. We know very little about what Emma's life, other than that Emma's really fun and adorable and so enthusiastic about everything. So and I've said this on the forums, it's so weird that the really hardcore House of the Dragon people following all the filming reports have been falling in love with Emma Darcy, like, since we were already in love with Emma a year ago, just because how fun Emma is. And the people who went, wow, I'm going to track down and watch Truth Seekers to see what Emma is like, and really liked Emma's performance and thought it was fun, and just little things Emma's done in a handful of other projects, and the enthusiasm level, that there's this hardcore, small but minority, but very dedicated fan base of, if you were obsessive in following the filming news, we are in love with Emma Darcy, and soon you will be too. That the beginning of the video where Emma's saying, this is what attracted me to Rhaenyra anyway, just that smile, that the exuberance of that wholehearted smile there, that's what we've been falling in love with for a long time, and I hope you all will too. So I'm really excited about all this, and this is what the actors said the audition process was like for them, and it's interesting they use placeholder dialogue. There's a lot more information about what their actual thoughts on the characters are, so watch those for context to the whole, well, no, Alicent isn't Cersei, but then why did you make her give Cersei dialogue? The longer things where they go, well, she's nuanced, she's actually not a bad person. Rhaenyra stuff of, well, it's not quite like Arya, it's not quite like Tywin, but this is the short version just focused on what was the audition experience like. I'll go into more detail. I'm not even going to have one video on this, but break it up into a video on the High Towers and Velaryons, then one on Rhaenyra and Alicent, because they're that important.